Good afternoon. I'm Jim Foster, Director of the City Club. I've known Jim Rokakis for many years, and like so many people in this community, have tremendous admiration and respect for his intellect and dedication as a public servant. So I listen with interest when he suggests a program. I know he does not seek the limelight for his own interests, but to advance an issue he feels is important for the public to understand. Therefore, it's with a certain admission that we missed that one when I, like so many other people, did not fully understand what Jim was saying when he called about 3 years ago to propose the City Club really ought to do something on this growing problem with foreclosed properties. We very definitely should have done a program back then. Jim Rokakis was truly, for a couple of years, the canary in the coal mine. Fortunately, Jim, unlike canaries, did not have to expire to give his warning. And we did the program. Although about 2 years later than it should have been, last August, Mr. Rokakis presented an excellent forum outlining the problems we were all facing, banks, homeowners, investors, and communities, as the mortgage foreclosure crisis was unfolding around us. At the time, he said the worst was still to come, and so it was. But what I have also come to expect from Jim Rokakis is that he does not just talk about problems, he looks for solutions. Before the crisis had even fully developed, he was instrumental in creating the foreclosure prevention program for Ohio. And when I was talking with Jim recently about the legacy of the foreclosure crisis, communities littered with vacant and vandalized homes and their impact on neighborhoods, he suggested that there might be a follow-on program about the proposals to address these devastating problems. This time I was much quicker to take him up and invite him to the City Club podium. Today we welcome Cuyahoga County Treasurer Jim Rokakis to discuss Ohio's plan for land banking to deal with the aftermath of the subprime mortgage crisis. Jim?
Thanks, Jim. I feel so much at home here. I see all these friends and family here in the front row, my wife, daughter, my father-in-law. Very comfortable here today. I'd like to thank you, Jim, and the City Club for giving the opportunity to speak here today on our desire to create a Cuyahoga County land bank, a very different land bank from the passive land banks that we are familiar with, and how I think a county land bank will become a very helpful and essential tool in dealing with the thousands and thousands of vacant properties that have been created by this foreclosure, this cataclysmic foreclosure crisis. And as you mentioned, Jim, I spoke here last year on the foreclosure crisis at the City Club. Much has happened in the last 10 months. Unfortunately, very little of it any good. Foreclosures capped out last year at about 15,500. We have people here from Policy Matters Ohio who have done great research on this topic. About 15,500 last year in Cuyahoga County. That was up from 13,500 in 2006 and way up from 3,500 in 1995. And based on the data from the first 4 months of this year, I think we're facing a similar number of foreclosures in 2008, somewhere in the 15,000, 16,000 range. However, it's worth noting that we're no longer leading in this category, in this dubious distinction. We're no longer first. That honor has now passed on to Las Vegas. For a long time, 44105, the famous zip code in Tony Rancatelli's Slavic Village was first in the country. Now you're way down, Tony. You're in the 50s or 60s. 8 of the top 10 zip codes leading in foreclosure are in Las Vegas, Nevada, and many other zip codes in California and Florida have also moved well ahead of Cleveland. But we continue to lose population, and the number of vacant properties continues to skyrocket. The Director of Community Development in Cleveland, who was with yesterday, Director Rush, pegs the number of vacant properties just awaiting demolition in the city of Cleveland at about 8,500. An informal survey we've done of council members on the number of vacant structures within the city of Cleveland, and I don't know the number. I've heard 12, I've heard 13,000. Mayor Jackson was quoted in an article in Newsweek that came out today. I think his quote was, "Pick a number." I recently received a list of vacant and foreclosed properties in the city of Cleveland Heights. I know we keep hearing it's 900 properties, but here's what I know. I was given a list of vacant and foreclosed properties in Cleveland Heights. It was 89 pages long, and there were 21 entries per page. You can do the math. Garfield Heights vacant property list, acknowledged vacant property list, around 1,400 and 50 vacant properties. Maple Heights is at least that number. Maple Heights continues, I think, to lead the county in foreclosures. Warrensville Heights is at least 500. Shaker Heights at least 500. East Cleveland, we believe about 2,500. Euclid somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 vacant properties. And you quickly get a very clear indicator of why this county has lost over 90,000 people in the past 7 years. The second worst population loss of any county in the country next to New Orleans Parish. And as I said many times, New Orleans had Hurricane Katrina. We had out of control and irresponsible lenders. The impact of these vacancies is wide-ranging. Millions of dollars are going to be spent throughout Northeast Ohio by strapped local governments, money they don't have. We know that the city of Cleveland is going to spend millions on upkeep. They're spending, I believe, $8 million last year, close to $8 million. I think they budgeted. I'm going to look to Jay Westbrook. Is it 9 or 10? I know it seems to be $9 million. $9 million this year for demolition. Shaker Heights is going to spend $500,000 this year on the upkeep of vacant properties. Euclid, a similar number. And I was at a forum recently in Westlake about foreclosures. They even have foreclosure forums in Westlake, where I sat next to the finance director who got up and said they're going to spend all kinds of money this year they hadn't budgeted on the maintenance of vacant and foreclosed properties in Westlake, Ohio. The demolition bill in this county, primarily Cleveland and to a lesser extent East Cleveland, I've got to believe is in excess right now of $125 million. And the longer it takes to demolish these properties, the greater the hit on the value surrounding properties. There's a widely quoted study out there by a guy named Dan Immergluck. He's a professor at Georgia Tech University, and he talks about how your property value is affected if you live next to a vacant property or there are vacant properties across the street, one on your block, two on your block. What do you think your property is worth when you live on a house, in a house on a street that has 15 homes, 10 of which are vacant? Thousands of appeals have been filed before the Board of Revision. Appeals by citizens who basically are saying my property has no value. I went up to the Board of Revision yesterday. I grabbed a sampling of some of these complaints. These are real live complaints, real live city residents who filed complaints asking that their property taxes be reduced. Let me just read you a real quick sampling. Here's one that was filed just recently with a man who lives on Ridpath Avenue. I think it's in South Collinwood. That homeowners across the street from me moved out and the properties have all been vandalized. He then proceeds to list 6 vacant properties that are within his own block. Here's one in Glenville, East 109th. Abundance of empty, boarded-up houses. My son is in this house just to keep out the vandals. Here's another one. This one is on the west side. It's on West 88th. It says here, no less than 6 houses are directly across the street and beside me that are abandoned and foreclosed. Here's another one on the west side, West 47th. This is the area I represented in City Council, my old ward. It says, my home has been vandalized. Nobody's longer living in it. The copper plumbing has been stolen. Here's one on East 151st Street. There are vacant homes on my street. The property next door to me looks like a jungle. And here's one, West 48th. This is also my old ward. She attached photos of vacant homes, properties, 5 vacant properties within a block of her house. And here are the ones that I find most difficult to read. This is an elderly woman that lives on Iowa Avenue. I think it's also in Glenville. She said she bought her home in 1964, and she said, foreclosures have ruined this neighborhood. I have nowhere to go. This, when you talk about who the victims are, this is your victim, right here. This is a woman who bought a house, played by the rules, had lived there since 1964, and there's nothing left for her to do. She can't sell her house. She's trapped. So when we talk about who the victims are, you have to keep in mind women like that woman because of what she's going through. How are these thousands and thousands of vacant properties being disposed of? Initially, the mortgage trusts have hired realtors who try to dispose of them in a conventional fashion. But as most city councilmen here will tell you, and there's also Councilman Simperman is here. How many members of city council? We have 3? 4. Who else is here? 3. Okay. Well, in any event, I always have to, I spent so many years in city council, I have a kinship with my former colleagues. But as I'll tell you, most of these councils will tell you by the time they get to a realtor in Cleveland, most of these houses have been vandalized and they've been stripped of everything of value in the property, of the copper pipes, the wiring, the doors, the windows, the fixtures, all gone. And as you might imagine, that tends to depress the sales price just a little. In fact, they often don't sell at all. You know they don't. Sometimes they end up being sold in bulk out-of-town companies like Econo Homes. We all know that. Those of you who live in Cleveland have been dealing with them. Or Destiny Ventures. You've been reading about them in the paper. They're speculators who claim to be well-intentioned. But for every home they rehabilitate, and there aren't many, for every one they rehabilitate, there's probably 10 that remained untouched. And if you want to read more about these, there's no better blog in Cleveland today than the one done by Bill Callahan. And it's Callahan's Cleveland Diary, and he chronicles this as well as anybody in town. And he just chronicled the saga of, I think, Destiny Ventures last week. So most of these don't end up being rehabbed. They end up sitting, remaining empty. You can also buy a home in Cleveland on eBay. I don't know if you know that wonderful online auction method for $1,000, maybe $1,500, perhaps $2,500. I just saw one yesterday on Mount Overlook. It had been bid up to $5,500. While I haven't received an email now in 2 weeks, I would regularly receive emails from people all over the country who would tell me they had just purchased a home in Cleveland on eBay. Would I be so kind as to tell them what their property taxes would be? Hundreds of these properties are disposed of at auctions. I know you've attended some, Tony, where speculators show up. There are hotels on I-77 in Rockside, out there in 71 in Bagley, where hundreds of people show up with the hope of cashing in on some great deal. From what I've seen of these sales, people who buy these properties have no intention of living in them. Rather, they hope to accomplish a quick turnaround, a quick flip, and a nice profit. Before I talk about our proposed land bank, which we will call the Land Reutilization Corporation in the legislation, but we'll call it land bank, or it's simpler, I want to discuss briefly what the foreclosures and the plummeting real estate market can do to property values and tax collection. In 2009, the county auditor will be doing an update of property values. Let me digress for a second. I don't know if you've noticed, as the gas prices go up, the defacing of Frank Russo on gas pumps are getting much more obscene. I said, Frank, at $3 a gallon, you really should take your mug off those pumps. God knows what it'll look like at $5 a gallon, huh? Anyway, in 2009, the county, I can kid with Frank, the county auditor, I wanted to put my picture on the tax bills, but Robin Thomas keeps telling me I can't do it. At least at Christmas, right? In 2009, the county auditor will be doing an update of property values, computer-based update that adjusts the appraisals done in 2006. Declining sale prices and values in 2006, 2007, and 2008 are almost certainly going to mean a reduction in value in Cleveland. And I don't know if you've seen this, the number of stories done in the Plain Dealer. We looked at this most recent one that showed the median sale prices in Cleveland between 2005 and 2007 had dropped 48.7%. Euclid 11.6%, Cleveland Heights 10.7%, Warrensville Heights 40.8%. So property values, as you know, have been plummeting. Let's assume a 10% reduction in value, and let's look at what the impact will be on the cities and the schools, and we'll pick 3 communities. Let's pick Cleveland, Euclid, and Cleveland Heights. A 10% reduction on the duplicate in the reappraisal in 09 will mean a $3 million hit, not 920 protected, a $3 million real hit to the public school system of Cleveland, and a $10 million hit to the general fund. 10%, so it's for every 1% the property values are reduced in the city of Cleveland, you can expect to members of city council a 1%, a $1 million reduction in the general fund. In Euclid, they would lose about $320,000 to their general fund and about $400,000 to their schools. Cleveland Heights, with a 10% property tax reduction, would lose $1.2 million to its general fund and $550,000 to their schools. And how do you think these taxing subdivisions are going to make up these losses? They're going to make these losses by asking for even larger millage requests, which are even less likely to pass given the economic crisis we now face. So how do we try to restore some semblance of order to this chaotic picture? Well, a group of us here, and this has been a group effort. There's a lot of people in this room who have been very involved in this. A group of us here, led by the folks at NPI, Frank Ford and Kermit Lind, Councilman Jay Westbrook, Tony Brancatelli, John Jakumovitz. We've also had great support from Gus Frangos and my staff, who's probably done more to write this law than anybody in the state of Ohio. He's been very active in this as well. And our partners in Columbus at VAPAC, the Something Property Action Council, whatever VACAP stand for, with Livia Brockman, have really focused in on the efforts. We looked at this problem and we focused in on the efforts of a man named Dan Kildee. Dan Kildee is the treasurer of Genesee County, Michigan, and established a land bank there in 2004. I don't know how many of you have met Dan. If you've heard Dan, I can't say enough about him. He's from Michigan. He has spent hundreds of hours in Ohio assisting us. He has spent hundreds of hours all over the country assisting people who want to deal with this property, a vacant property. Great guy. He's my hero. He's also, I understand, running for governor of Michigan. I'm going to go up there and work for him. But let me say first that land banks, which are a public entity that become the repository for vacant lands, are not new to us in Northeast Ohio. Cleveland has operated a very successful land bank in conjunction with the county treasurer's office for many years with my predecessor Frank Gall. In this past decade with my office, we've taken delinquent property, tax delinquent property, we foreclosed on it, and we transferred to the city of Cleveland and the other land banks around the county that hold it. And they dispose of it in a variety of ways, most typically for side yard expansion. But they tend to be very passive, and they're not equipped to deal with the crisis at hand. The proposed land bank we're talking about will be different in a number of ways. We'll have far greater capabilities in dealing with vacant property, both with and without structures. It will have its own income stream, and ultimately will become the largest vacant property owner in Cuyahoga County because it will take in not only tax delinquent properties, it'll take not only properties that will be donated by banks looking to unload a lot of these properties they're stuck with, but it'll also end up taking all tax delinquent foreclosed property in Cuyahoga County, just as Mr. Kildee's land bank does in Genesee County, Michigan. Let me talk quickly about the legislation and try to make it understandable. It's divided roughly into three sections. First, it amends Section 1724 of the Ohio Revised Code, the section of the code that empowers county governments to form community improvement corporations, CICs, nonprofit corporations that work on community development issues. All 88 counties have them. The proposed law will infuse this section of the code, giving these CICs additional broad and sweeping capabilities in what will be known, as I said earlier, as a county land reutilization corporation. The new land bank will have the authority to buy, to sell, to hold, to swap property, the power to leverage, the power to borrow, the power to apply for and accept grants, to charge fees, to do tax increment financing, to receive gifts, to take assignments of mortgages, to enter into third-party contracts. The list is a long one, much too long for this speech. But the theory is we want this proposed land bank to be agile. We want it to be able to move quickly, entrepreneurial, much like a private corporation. We're not proposing another layer of government. I know people are concerned about that, and especially in Columbus, but we need an entity that is able to deal quickly in this crisis. The second major revision of the Ohio Revised Code will deal with how we collect and distribute property taxes and how we will fund this land bank. And again, I want to thank Dan Kildee for his direction. My office collects about $1.5 billion annually in property taxes. Let me digress momentarily. You don't read much about my employees. We haven't been on the front page of the paper. You know, we're a rarity in county government. That's right, and we're here. But we're a rarity in county government. We're a civil service office. Remember civil service, that thing they started back in the late 19th century? Remember? My employees don't do politics. We're prohibited by law. They're selected from a large applicant pool. We're not overstaffed. They do fine work, and it's the fine work they do that allows their boss to work on all these crazy policy initiatives. And I first give thanks to Robin Thomas, who runs the office, but a lot of my employees here, you want to just raise your hand, guys? They do good work. We collect about $1.5 billion each year in property taxes, $750 million roughly each half. About 10% of that total goes delinquent each half with penalties of 5% and then 10% attaching to that delinquent amount, plus eventual interest charges. Our plan will allow us to pay those taxes off in full to all the taxing subdivisions of the community, the schools, the libraries, the parks, by short-term borrowing from our daily balances on hand, and then repay the money as we collect it. So we're in effect, I've got 10 minutes, Steve, thanks. We in effect will borrow money internally, we'll pay all the taxing subdivisions off in full, because we know from studies that we've done that we can collect most of this money back in 12 to 18 months, but we're not collecting it with penalties and with interest. And we know that after we've paid ourselves back, we'll approximately see $7,000 in, I don't want to call it profit or arbitrage, let's say excess. That's $7 million rather, $7 million. That $7 million will be directed to the land bank. In effect, it's going to be the money we need to be able to operate a land bank successfully. It's critical because a land bank without a revenue stream would be a waste of everybody's time. We need money to maintain these properties, to mothball structures properly. Rob Curry has been helpful to us from Cleveland Housing Network. I thought it would cost about $500 to $1,000 to properly mothball the property. I was disabused of that notion. It's probably 3-4 times that if you want to do it responsibly. Money to mothball structures, to cut grass, to clear debris, and to responsibly hold these properties. We need a revenue stream to pay off bonds. It's my hope that we will be able to issue bonds in late 2009 or 2010 to do wide-scale demolition in Cuyahoga County, primarily in the city of Cleveland. The city is cash-strapped, does not have the money to attack this problem with the dollars the problem requires. Philadelphia, for example, did a bond issue in the late 1990s of $250 million, almost all of it devoted to demolition. And folks, the county or a land bank helping the city, this is regionalism, and I know we talk about it all the time. It's the leveraging the financial resources of the entire county to allow us to reclaim and rehabilitate vacant, abandoned, and tax foreclosed properties. Some communities like Minneapolis-St. Paul and Louisville, Kentucky, they do it directly. Some do it through the back door. I'll take the back door. I don't really care. I think this is the only strategic way I think that we can begin to stabilize the tax base. It's no longer a Cleveland-only problem. Clearly, this is a problem now affecting all of Cuyahoga County. Finally, the new legislation will alter the way we dispose of tax foreclosed property in Cuyahoga County. Under the current system, these properties go to the auction, where the good properties are with value, are purchased at an auction. The less valuable properties are left for a second sale, where they're ignored again and eventually are sold for pennies on the dollar, or they escheat to the state. The existing system necessarily promotes successive cycles of speculation. Under the new system, these tax foreclosed properties, once they are adjudicated foreclosed and a 45-day redemption period expires, so once the judge says this property is foreclosed, instead of it going to the sheriff, there'll be a 45-day period within which you can redeem that foreclosure. Once that period expires, the property will transfer directly to the land bank. Now, we go to great lengths in my office. My employees will tell you we offer up to 3 contracts by law, and I know Mike Sweeney is nodding. We got to get you current within 5 years. We go to great lengths to avoid foreclosure. But the reality is foreclosures will occur, and I imagine at some point there'll be stories of controversy about how properties are foreclosed, but it is inevitable and it's required by law. If the property has value and it can be resold, will most likely be, and these sales will provide an additional source of revenue to the land authority, just as they do in Flint, Michigan. Through generous support of the Cleveland and Gun Foundations and the help of MPI, we were able to fund the extensive legal research and financial modeling that gave us the bill that we went to the LSC on, Legislative Service Commission, on the 1st of May. We knew the time would be our enemy because it's a very busy time in the legislature. They're adjourning tomorrow. They were saddled with a huge number of legislative requests, not to mention the fact they were doing a capital and a budget bill. But we also knew we had strong support. We had met with Speaker Husted and Senate President Harris, and we had great support, bipartisan, from both members of the Senate and the House. And we received assurances of their support with the caveat that the bill's passage might have to wait till November. We spent much of last week in Columbus. Gus Frango's here, was here almost all week long. He's done more to promote this bill, as I said, than anybody. And we spent there meeting with legislators in an attempt to find a bill that we could attach the amended legislation to. And we found a bill. It was House Bill 359, and we were going to amend 359 with this bill. But we had one minor problem. 359 was 4 pages long, and our land bank amendment was about 250 pages long. So it proved not to be a good fit, obviously. The last Wednesday, we met with the entire Senate caucus. They were very supportive for over an hour, which was wonderful. We had bipartisan support from conservatives as well as liberals, Republicans as well as Democrats. It was great to see people from Cincinnati who typically have been on the other side of these issues, as supportive as they were. 5 minutes? Okay. And they asked us a very simple question. They said, we'll try to get this, but we would much rather you please give us just till November. They said, we really need a little more time to do this. And at that point, who are we to dictate to the President of the Senate? We agreed. We really want to get this right, and even if we have to wait an extra 6 months. This will give us time to meet with the counties that are most interested in establishing a land bank. This includes 3 other counties that have been devastated by the foreclosure crisis: Lucas County, Montgomery County, and Hamilton County. We'll be in Toledo next week with our commissioners, treasurer, and community leaders. We're in Dayton the week after that, and we're going to spend 2 days in Cincinnati on June 25th and June 26th. We're meeting with their commissioners and their treasurer and community groups who have been very supportive of the land bank concept. I expect that land banks will be established in all these counties by 2009. I think other counties will take a wait-and-see attitude. Assuming we get this land bank up and running, what do we hope to accomplish? I was elected to Cleveland City Council a long time ago, 1977. I took a tour of Lonnie Burton's ward, Ward 12, in the city of Cleveland, and I remember looking at the central neighborhood. There was nothing left. It was devastated. I was in Lonnie's house, which is off of East 38th, and I could see all the way to East 55th, and he explained to me that this demolition had occurred over probably a 20-year cycle. Lonnie unfortunately died in 1984 at the age of 38 of a heart attack. So he never got a chance to see his dream accomplished. But in fact, those neighborhoods were completely built out by 2001, 2002. So if you think about it, this house has started to come down in 1950, 1955. New houses were all up by 2000, 2002. It was about a 50-year cycle. At least a 45 to 50-year cycle, a period of death and rebirth in the community. And why am I telling this story? The land bank is a long-term hold and acquire strategy. As much as I'd like to see immediate results, and the issuance of bonds and wide-scale demolition will be close to immediate results, think of this as a 25 to 30-year strategy. But I believe in the value of land. Remember what Will Rogers said? Buy land, they ain't making any more of it. As gas climbs to $5, $6, or $7, I have a hard time not believing that land in the central city, close to the Cleveland Clinic, close to University Circle, close to downtown, won't be valuable again. Funny thing about this foreclosure crisis that sped up the demise of a lot of housing in Cleveland that was likely to face the wrecking ball anyway. We're talking about houses that were without basements, without garages, without driveways, on 30 by 50-foot lots. I think many of these houses would be facing a wrecking ball at some time in the future anyway. How much time do I have, Jim?
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I get nervous. Last time I thought I had enough material. I had way too much. But so let me just, if I can, conclude. We've been shrinking, as you know, for a long time. We've been sprawling since the 1950s. Cleveland's population peaked in 1950, and we've been losing population ever since. Besieged by one crisis after another. Federal policies that encouraged outward migration from cities, loss of jobs, globalization, bad government, bad decisions by the private sector, and now one of the cruelest cuts of all, the foreclosure crisis that has torn apart the social fabric of so many communities in Cuyahoga County. I'm not going to overemphasize the importance of a land bank or a land authority. The decision of what happens with this land in all of these cities, Cleveland, Euclid, Maple, Garfield Heights, that decision is ultimately a local one. We're not making the call for these communities. We're going to be working in partnership with them. But if we can use this authority to check, at least in part, the next round of speculators and predators, that will be a good thing. If we can use it as a vehicle to raise money to demolish thousands of vacant properties and arrest the decline in property values in stabilized neighborhoods, that will be a very good thing. But if we can say to our kids, including my daughter here today, that we began a process in 2008 that ensured that Northeast Ohio was a better place to raise our children, we took back control of our community, that will be a great thing. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club, we're listening to a special program featuring Cuyahoga County Treasurer Jim Rokakis. We will return to our speaker in a minute for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate your questions now and remind you that questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here, especially those who are guests, and we hope you will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. On Wednesday, June 4th, we welcome Hollywood director Rawson Thurber of Dodgeball and Mysteries of Pittsburgh fame, and Martin Luther King Jr. High School student Arlena Kemp, winner of the Scenarios USA 2008 What's the Real Deal contest. Thurber is in town directing Arlena's film Man-Child. And on Friday, June 6th, our regular Friday forum will feature Dr. Susan Tave-Zellman, Superintendent of Instruction at the Ohio Department of Education. If you wish to make reservations or order a CD or DVD of today's program, please call 1-888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082. We would like to welcome guests at tables hosted by Charter One, Cleveland City Council, Cuyahoga County Treasurer's Office, Eastside Organizing Project, Key Bank, Malamed Communications, National City Neighborhood Housing Services of Greater Cleveland, and U.S. Bank. Thank you for joining us today. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club Director of Development, Jessica Allen, and Outreach Coordinator, Deborah Agosti. First question, please.
Treasurer Rokakis, question for you. When you institute the land bank, are you going to have any incentives to encourage people to move back into the Cuyahoga County, since you have a big, large drain of people who moved out of the county over the last several years?
Again, I think anything we do is going to be in concert with local governments. Local governments, again, we're really partnering with them to the extent that we have financial capacity to assist local governments in offering those kinds of incentives. I think that would be great. Let me talk about governance. The great thing about question and answer, you can always slip in stuff you didn't have time in your speech. Since you asked me about governance, let me talk to you about how this is going to be structured. It's either a 5 or 7 member board by law because it's a CIC. 2 will be county commissioners. 1 will be the treasurer, whoever he or she may be. And then it's either a 5 or a 7-person board. We envision either 2 city representatives if it's a 5-person board plus the 3 county. If it's a 7-person board, we're going to get representation from mayors and city managers. So they're ultimately going to make those decisions. And all I can tell you is that if we have the capacity, that would be wonderful. And we're going to be very aggressive. We've talked about this. We want to be very aggressive in approaching foundations all over the country, because I think what we do here and how we deal with these vacant properties can be a model to other communities facing this issue. So I know I was at a meeting yesterday where somebody suggested that there's this real problem with IT specialists, and companies have been threatening to leave Cleveland because they can't get IT folks, that you might offer an IT person a house. I don't know if that'll work. I mean, we've talked about giving artists a home. We've talked about making housing available for people who are without homes, the homeless. So I think there's all kinds of possibilities. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. But the goal really would be that in the next year or so, once we're incorporated and up and running, that we know that banks out there, have sitting on thousands of properties. Talking about Countrywide, the good friends of ESOP, Countrywide, and all the others, Citigroup, that purchased the Argent portfolio, the horrible Argent mortgage portfolio. And there'll be an opportunity for us to, I think, negotiate not only the stuff they want to see torn down, but the properties that have value. And one last comment. There are a lot of villains in this foreclosure crisis. We know who they are, but there are some heroes. There are people here from NHS, Cleveland Housing Network, and ESOP that have saved probably 2,500 people in the last 2 years from foreclosure. Would you guys mind standing so I can applaud for you? Come on, Jeannie.
Jim, you've done well, and thank you very much. You're certainly the recognition as County Leader of the Year is very well deserved, and as members of the Cleveland City Council, the group you got out of, we want to congratulate you for that. Jim, this really is a crisis that has reflected just a total collapse of the real estate market, and the land bank is a safety net, is a recovery mechanism. When we've gone to the state in previous years, we found less than a receptive ear. I'm wondering what you have found in the state legislature and in the governor now that has created a greater degree of receptiveness for our plights here in Cuyahoga County and other urban counties.
I need to get some legislation passed in November, so let me give you a political answer. They're a great bunch of men and women, and you were there in 2002, and you saw the city's anti-predatory lending law and Dayton's and Toledo's shot down, and we were all there in 3, 4, and 5, where there was no receptivity to some of the reforms we needed to put the brakes on this crisis. I think there's a political reality. I think that both sides, especially the other side of the aisle, I think they realized that this thing, they were fed a line by a lot of folks that were lobbying them, and they woke up one day and we were the worst. We were worst in the country with incredible damage done all over the state. What I'm most amazed by is the large number of conservative legislators from southwest Ohio, Cincinnati, who are on board. I mean, really on board. They realize that this thing has ravaged them. They joked with us. They said, you're lucky. You have a lake up in Northeast Ohio. And I start saying, yeah, it's very nice. We have, we can go boat. We can go enjoy the beach. And the guy said, no, you got it all wrong. They said, in Cincinnati, people move in every direction. They move to Warren, Butler, Claremont, Indiana, and Kentucky. They said, you have the lake. Nobody can move north. So they get it. And as you know, Cincinnati has had real population loss. So they're very supportive. Senator Bill Seitz has been a champ on this. Gus will tell you, last week he's met with Kildee. Something I didn't think would happen. He's met with them and is a big supporter. He and Representative Grindell, Dolan, Patton up here, and others will be very critical in helping to get this thing done.
Mr. Treasurer, I'm sorry. You were very pressed for time, and in your description of how the land bank is to be financed, it went completely over my head. Could you take a few minutes and go through that in some greater detail?
Yes.
So we can understand it, please?
Yes, I will. There, as I said, we collect about $1.5 billion a year in the office. Split it in half, roughly $750 each half. Roughly 10% of the taxes go delinquent each half. In the short term, there's a 5% penalty, and there's a 10% penalty, and there's interest charges that are attached. Under this legislation, the interest will be immediately, it'll be 1% per month. What we have done is a historic analysis, gone back a number of years, again with foundation support. We went back and we crunched data going back a number of years, and we found out when this money tends to get collected and how quickly it's repaid, how much of that is penalty, how much of it's interest, and how long it would take before that money that we in effect have borrowed, maybe done delinquent tax anticipation notes, when that debt is repaid and when there's excess. We've been selling tax liens here since 1999, and Dan Kildee, I'm going to keep referring to Dan, said, you have to understand, he said, tax lien sales are privatization of profit and socialization of loss. He said, even when you think your duplicate's not valuable and those vacant taxes have, the delinquent taxes have no value, trust me, there's a reason people keep coming in and bidding for delinquent tax liens. Most recently, Bear Stearns. Remember? Anyway, they didn't, not any longer. But the point is, they purchased a company that purchased our liens. So in doing the analysis of this, we came to the conclusion that we could, in effect, pay back the debt, and it was that excess penalty and interest that would create excess. And we went back for 3 years, and we determined by doing this analysis that approximately between $6 and $8 million annually could be created through a process where we fund the debt internally, pay ourselves back, and take the excess, which consists of the penalty and interest. Now, that's one source of revenue, and the other will be land sales. Now, that's speculative. I have no idea what's going to come into the tax foreclosure process. I know up in Michigan, they have a couple $1 million a year. I don't know how many of you know the story of Flint, Michigan. It's the home of General Motors, was at one time. Roger and Me, I'm sure you saw the movie. Kildee says that Flint is the largest monosyllabic city in the country. But their job losses have been incredible. 88,000 General Motors jobs there in 1979, and they're down to, what, just a handful. Their population has been cut in half. And even in a city as depressed as Flint, there was, in effect, profit or excess or arbitrage, whatever you want to call it, in the collection of delinquent taxes. We have no other way to raise the money and can't go to taxpayers and ask them for any more money. And I think it's only we can do it with some guarantees that there'll be money there to run the land bank. I hope that's a better explanation.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the process and viability of levying fines against abandoned property? If we can track down the landowners and maybe try and collect, I think there are some homeowners out there that moved on to another property perhaps and are leaving their property untended, which is driving down property values.
Yeah, again, a local function, and I look to the folks here from the city of Cleveland. I don't have that authority. That's authority that is granted to local governments. I know that the city has been aggressive. Judge Ray Pianka has been probably as creative as anybody in the country. I don't know if you follow what Judge Pianka has been doing. He's been assessing huge fines. He's been refusing to do evictions for those companies that have not paid their fines. He's been seizing the accounts. He's taken a very aggressive approach. and I commend them for that, but that really is not going to be in the purview of the county land authority. I know that one of the questions that I've begun to hear from some of the more conservative members of the legislature is why can't we pass legislation in Columbus to allow us to aggressively go after the person, the individual who owns this property, the debt follows the property. I mean, you're beginning to hear talk from parts of the state about going after people aggressively. There's also been talk, you've probably seen it, that would actually impose a higher property tax on vacant land. Have you ever heard of this theory? There's a theory that you would actually go after abandoned properties, and if a house is vacant, you in effect penalize them by imposing a higher property tax to force that property either be rehabilitated and sold or demolished. But I don't have that authority.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
I know that you've talked a few times about the role of the local authorities in making certain rules about this, but will you try to have an influence to make sure that people that have been displaced from their neighborhoods through foreclosure have an opportunity to have a responsible housing opportunity, whether that's rental or new ownership? Will there be anything in the legislation that will push the governing body toward that goal?
Look, there'll be incredible opportunities. Let's think about for a second, we talked about informally in our committees this arbitrage process. As properties come in, you're going to arbitrage. There'll be some properties you can immediately resell. You can recycle properties immediately, and to the extent they provide a revenue stream, you might want to put those on the market and bring that revenue into the land bank. There'll be another category of property that calls for the responsible mothballing. That it's a property that may not be reusable today or might not fit into a sales plan immediately, but if you can responsibly mothball that program, and again, I'm going to keep emphasizing the fact these decisions, they're going to be heavily local. We're going to partner very closely with all of the communities in Northeast Ohio, and I think we're going to be a vehicle that's able to hold these because hopefully we have the resources to do it, and we do it in partnership with places like Cleveland and Shaker Heights. So there'll be a second category. Those are the properties I think you're interested in. I think, unfortunately, the majority of the properties that come into a land bank are going to be demolished. I think you have to visit neighborhoods throughout the city. I mean, as I said, Commissioner Rush said yesterday, 8,500 properties awaiting demolition right now. So, are some of those properties you might want to pull back out and see if you can mothball? Maybe, but I think most of them are too far gone. So there will be opportunities. At this point, I can't tell you what they'll be. And we look forward to establishing, once this land bank is up and running, we're going to use this 6 months, by the way, which we were so unhappy we thought we'd get it done before we recessed. We're going to use this as a planning period where we can be in a position to start to create these relationships. I know Shaker Heights has already been very aggressive. Shaker Heights has come to us. Mayor Lyken, his staff came in. They're very interested in how the land bank is going to work, and they've already asked us to sign some letters of understanding, and they were fine. They were fair, and I understand their concern.
I was wondering, what are some of the biggest concerns on the local level? Because with giving up some of the authority that the local cities have now over their own land banks and giving that over to the county, not just here in Northeast, in Cuyahoga County, but also in some of the other counties that you spoke with?
Well, the way the legislation is written, cities that have land banks get first crack at the property. So to the extent that the city has a desire to take some of the property back as these properties are foreclosed, cities will have first crack. So if they have property they really want, they shouldn't feel threatened because it's theirs for the asking. All I would hope is, I would hope that as we go forward on this, that, and I'm sure they will, the cities really plan strategically, and that if you're in a position where you could take down and over time eventually clear an entire block, I would hope that we'd resist the temptation to have somebody come in and say, I want the lot in the middle, because I want to build a house, or I want a lot. I mean, I'm hoping, and I know this will happen, the cities will be strategic in their thinking and their planning, and that we're going to partner with them. I just don't hope, I hope we don't let political processes get in the way of good common sense. And I had a long talk with Tom Byer, who's here. Where are you, Tom? There, Tom. And we talked about a lot of things. I mean, Tom has been following the demographics of this community more than anybody. I think he can speak to it as eloquently as anybody around. But we talked about the fact that we've got this opportunity to plan, the new Euclid, the new Maple Heights, the new Garfield Heights. Not that this land bank will do it, but hopefully we can use this to spur the discussion as we take these properties in and we begin to plan with our partners how this might work. I'm optimistic. I'd like to think we can do that. But we're not working against interests of any city. In fact, you want it, you got it.
Because Cuyahoga County is a largely built-out community, we face the issue of having a lack of developable spaces to attract businesses. And so we've really been working on brownfields quite a bit. Brownfields are extremely costly. And do you think that this will be another vehicle that in certain neighborhoods that might have strategic locations where perhaps as a shrinking community, people may not want to move back to those as a residential area, that will become an opportunity for us for economic development to attract additional businesses?
Tracy it's a great loss for the county. She worked for us, and it's the city's gain. She's become the economic development director for the city of Cleveland. And the answer to that is, by the way, how do you like it there? Did you speak to the mic there? Anyway. Well, the answer is yeah. And Tracy, I know that you live in the city and you visit many of these neighborhoods, and I think, realistically speaking, a lot of these neighborhoods are going to take years to. I talked about the Lonnie Burton example. So you've got property. I'm going to look at Tony here. You've got some properties that are near freeways. They're on rail lines. When they built housing in some of these communities back in 1890 and 1900 and 1910, they built it because it was close to the mill, right? They built it because it was close to their church. They had small living space, but it didn't matter because there were plenty of local taverns. It was their rec room. I imagine a lot of those properties don't get rebuilt. I imagine a lot of those properties, and again, keep thinking long-term, 25, 30 years, that you may not be able to do it overnight, but over time, I think you can begin to build blocks of property that have a lot in the way of development opportunities. I wish we could do it overnight, but it's just not going to happen. I would also add on the demolition side that we've talked to the commissioners. They've been very supportive. We talk about doing this demolition bond in late 2009 or 2010, and all three commissioners have said that they would assist and maybe use the full faith and credit of the county, that they recognize the value of helping to clear the blight in places like Cleveland and East Cleveland.
Thank you certainly for your leadership on this. It's been critically important. Certainly in my neighborhood, we talk about all the distress we're facing. And I think I estimated of the 1,000 boarded houses in our neighborhood. In the
by the way, 1,000 boarded houses in his neighborhood.
The 60 to 70% are probably deals that would never have been originated a short number of years ago, and they're just fraudulent and predatory lending. It's not necessarily because of somebody who's in bad economic times. Can you talk a little bit more on the aggressive nature of going out and seizing these assets, really the rights that people have given up, the mortgage companies that have walked away, both in terms of the impact, are the mortgage companies still going to continue to pay the taxes, and what that might do if they decide to stop, and two, going in after these assets to save the other homes in the neighborhood, a little bit about the churning of the families that are in these homes that are being displaced, really aren't owners, they're tenants, and how we protect it. I know we have organizations like Cleveland Housing Network and others that can help save these families, but really the responsibility of some of the mortgage companies that you've been dealing with and what they've been responding to you on.
We've been in touch. I'm trying to think of let's go through the list of people we've had regular contact with. Deutsche Bank, I think as a servicer, they now become the largest foreclosure of properties in Cuyahoga County. Is that right, Zach? Deutsche Bank, one of them. Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Larry Litton. Larry Litton is the 11th largest servicer in the country. Litton is a regular visitor to our office. He was in about a month ago, and he says, how's that land bank coming? Well, I know why. Litton wants to offload all his properties. The amazing thing about all these companies is they continue to pay their property taxes every 6 months. But the clear indication I've gotten from all of them, I had a long talk with one of the representatives of Deutsche Bank, is there'll be a point at which they cut their losses and they run, and they stop paying those property taxes. So it's our goal and our hope, and the city's litigation, I know there's some people that don't agree with it. I certainly do. I wish it had come sooner. I wish there was some action initiated at the state level. There'll be plenty of litigation to keep lawyers in this country busy for the next 10 years, but I think there will be continued pressure on these major banks to do, at least at some level, the right thing. It's a little late now. The damage is done, neighborhoods are empty, houses are vacant, property values have plummeted, But I think, and I'm thinking in conversation in particular with somebody at Deutsche Bank, we go to them when this land bank is up running, and we basically say, give us the REO portfolio. Yeah, I know you want to give us the bad stuff. We want some of the stuff that has value. So we can keep the stuff and sell it, use it to help demolish these properties. I mean, I think at some level they're going to try to get right with us. The fact that they're being sued probably doesn't hurt. The fact that there are articles on a daily basis. By the way, I don't know if you know, but Tony is featured prominently. He talked about the fraud. This week's Newsweek has a huge story on Cleveland and the mortgage madness, and it's really something you should all read. And talks about how one individual bought and sold 100 properties, whatever the number was, all fraudulent. Still operates in the community, owns a local restaurant, unprosecuted. But I believe, Tony, that we'll be positioned, if we have this authority that speaks, has the imprimatur of officialdom, I think we'll be in a position to cut some deals. But like I said, up until now, I checked, they were all good on their taxes in January. I think the pooling and service agreements require that they maintain all their governmental obligation. You have any questions, Jim?
I live in Cuyahoga County, but the gas is getting pretty expensive, so
Yeah.
maybe we need to come back down. And it was what this lady said over here. I think, you know, the incentive to use the property for either industrial or commercial use or for new homes is what is also going to help to turn this community around.
Question?
Hi, Jim. Tim Ferris. My question is, if we go ahead and essentially provide a government solution to a privately caused problem, and then go ahead and warehouse the properties and put them aside for a while and then go for future redevelopment, and then a bank will come in and want to lend a large amount of money, aren't we essentially using, bailing out the banks right now and then letting them come and play later? Aren't we rewarding bad behavior?
I think, Tim, the recognized losses now to the mortgage industry, the most recent figure I've seen, $450 billion of recognized losses right now. They're not bailed out. Those are real losses. This whole question of, by the way, as you know, we're not out of this crisis by a long shot. There are many of these mortgages that are going to go bad over the next year. And, you know, for the record, everybody says the bottom of this crisis is the fourth quarter of '09. So we're not out of it yet. I mean, it's obviously moved to other parts of the country. But, you know, I struggle with this question of bailing out banks. Let's talk about from Bear Stearns. And I know this is going to fly counter to what most of you think about me. I don't think we have any choice but to prop Bear Stearns up. And I could be wrong. I don't tend to be a practitioner of high finance, but I shudder to think it would have happened if Bear Stearns had gone under 2 months ago. I think the consequences would have been cataclysmic, and it would have been felt throughout the financial markets throughout the world. So as much as I recoiled at that, I don't know that we had any choice. I know that's probably not going to be the prevailing opinion amongst my friends here. But if bailing out banks, let's talk about what a bailout consists of. One of the problems we have right now in this county is I've seen statistics that say that 30% of the mortgages in Cuyahoga County are for more money than the property is worth today. 30%. And as people from ESOP and NHS and CHN, they do workouts. I know one of the workout items we're beginning to see now is starting to give up some of that value. I mean, if somebody's in a $75,000 mortgage and the house is worth $50,000, you're not going to refinance it for $75,000. You're trying to get the bank to come back down off of that. They're going to give something up. We're keeping somebody in that house. I suppose you might argue at that point we're bailing out the bank. Maybe, but I'd rather keep the borrower in that home and preserve the integrity of that neighborhood. So the question of who we're bailing out is one that I struggle with. You know, you just cannot escape the fact, and we talked about this last year when I was here,